Before I begin my presentation, let me share with you one of my personal experience. During a trip to Melbourne, Australia, I visited the local supermarket. So when it was my turn to make payment, the cashier greeted me and said, "Hi, how was your day?" To a Singaporean like me, I was utterly shocked, but I greeted back anyway. As the saying goes, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. So the moment I reached Singapore, I decided to give it a shot at my own local supermarket. And I began greeting the cashier. I wasn't really expecting an answer, but to my horror, she actually replied, "Aboy, you xiao." So for those who don't know what's you xiao, it actually means, "Are you crazy?" in native dialect. So today, this simple analogy shows the differences between cultural norms, which related to our today's topic on intercultural communication. So a very good afternoon to everyone, Dr. Chan. My team today will be going through on the topic of intercultural communication. The case study we have chosen today is on the HSBC advertisements on cultural differences. The agenda of our today's presentation will begin with introduction, where I will be defining intercultural communication and explaining on its importance. We have selected two HSBC advertisement clips on different intercultural communication scenarios, which will be taken on by Sherman and Benjamin to explain on those videos. After which, Jiang will provide you with recommendations on how to improve on our intercultural communication. Last but not least, Clarence will summarize and conclude on our presentation. So let's begin with what is intercultural communication. It is defined as situated communication between individuals or groups of different linguistics or cultural origins. To give you a much clearer illustration, let's take a look at this picture. The man is bowing while the woman is offering a handshake. This picture shows a non-verbal communication in the form of greeting. In Asian culture, particularly in Japan, people bow when they greet, whereas in the West, people offer handshake or sometimes even a hug. This clearly shows an example of intercultural miscommunication. So can you imagine if this were to happen to you, how awkward it will be? Furthermore, it may turn out to be rude to the other person. Hence, it is essential for us to acquire skill in intercultural communication. There are three reasons why acquiring these skills is so important, especially in Singapore. First, globalization has made today's world an interconnected one. Due to this reason, there is increased contact between people from various cultures. Second, be it in banking or engineering sector, we are expected to work in teams that consist of expatriates due to Singapore's shrinking workforce. Lastly, Singapore has no natural resources. We have to venture out globally for business opportunities in order for us to prosper. Of the points I had mentioned require each and everyone to acquire good intercultural communication skill. And now, I'll pass on my time to Sherman, who will be sharing and explaining to you on intercultural communication scenario that happened in a Chinese restaurant.
Okay, thank you, Sayal. Now that all of you actually know more about intercultural communication, let me just show you a video before I proceed on with my presentation.
The English believe it's a slur on your host's food if you don't clear your plate. Whereas the Chinese feel you're questioning their generosity if you do. At HSBC, we never underestimate the importance of local knowledge. Which is why we have local banks staffed by local people in over 80 countries across the globe.
Okay,
all of you did not get what the video was actually about, let me just summarize it. The setting of the video is actually in a Chinese restaurant, and it is portrayed as the Chinese man treating the Englishman to a meal. Although the Englishman was actually surprised with the exotic dish with the eel, he tried to actually finish it, as he believes that it is an insult to the host's food if he doesn't do so. While on the other hand, the Chinese actually feels that he is questioning his generosity each time he did that. And besides the difference in the beliefs, another reason that caused this miscommunication would actually be the way they communicate. This term, high context and low context culture, is actually presented by an anthropologist Edward Twitchell Hall in his book in 1976. And it actually refers to the culture's tendency to rely on high context messages or low context messages in their routine communication. And as you can see over here, the Chinese are actually higher up towards the chart, towards the high context side, whereas the English are towards the low context side. And to explain more about this, let me just explain what these two terms actually mean. People from high context culture will actually rely less on verbal communication and more on non-verbal actions and the surroundings. Sorry. So they actually people from this culture actually prefer to maintain social harmony, and they place less emphasis on words and more emphasis on non-verbal clues and the body language. And as such, it is common for them to avoid being too direct, and they are also more contemplative of the things they say. Countries with this culture will actually include China, Japan, and the Middle East. So in this video, the Chinese man can be seen to be more observant of his surroundings, and each time the Englishman actually clears his plate, he will actually order another portion for him, and in fact a larger portion. And another portrayal of these characteristics can be observed by the waiter and the guest. The waiter can be seen to be observing the guest's plates every now and then, whereas the chef can be seen to be looking out of the kitchen window so as to observe the situation, so as to know whether or not he needs to make further preparation. So on the other side, the low context culture, people from this culture actually rely more on verbal communication and less on non-verbal clues. They rely a lot on words, especially in contracts and negotiations. They also take words literally. To add on to that, they value straightforwardness and they enjoy debates. And because of that, they actually feel uncomfortable in silence. And countries with this culture will actually include the Great Britain, the North America, and also Germany. So in this video, the Englishman did not expect himself to actually have more of the same dish by clearing his plate. Reason being, he would actually speak up if he wanted more, and he expected the Chinese to know of this as well. And this actually shows that how the difference in the high context and low context culture can actually result in a miscommunication. Now that I've actually talked about some of the causes of intercultural miscommunication, let me just pass on the time to Benjamin, who will be talking more about it with another example.
Thank you, Sherman. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ben, and today I'll be talking about the second advertisement. So let's take a look at the video first.
In some Asian cities, it's considered acceptable for a commuter to fall asleep on the shoulder of a stranger. In New York, it's quite a different story. Of course, it could always adapt. We're the global bank that never underestimates the importance of local knowledge. HSBC, the world's local bank.
Okay, so now that we have looked at the video, let me talk a bit about what's the cultural practice present in the video. So, firstly, it's set in New York at the subway, and you can see an Asian man has unintentionally fell asleep for a good nap on the shoulder of a Caucasian male. And after doing some research on where is this acceptable, I found that there was a cultural practice in Japan actually, where it's considered an act of kindness to allow a stranger to lean or sleep on you on any form of public transportation. And there's a particular Japanese word actually for this action of unintentionally falling asleep in public. It's called inemuri, which is loosely translated in English to being sleep while being present. Present being anywhere, anytime. And this kind of sleeping is actually considered as a evidence of sheer exhaustion due to your hard work at school or at work or anywhere. And this scene is actually commonly seen in many public places and can even see it in the work environment actually. So to draw a comparison to our local society, is this cultural practice in Singapore, is it present in Singapore? So there was actually an article written on Storm about this particular situation actually. And there were two comments at the end of the article that really drew my attention actually. Firstly, the person said, if the person is a pretty girl, I don't mind. Or, okay ma, so long as that person is clean, I'm fine with it. I mean, they were probably meant to be jokes, but I think it clearly underlies the fact that it's still very much a very uncomfortable or a very awkward situation for Singaporeans to find themselves in. I mean, could I have a raise of hands to see if anyone will allow a stranger to sleep on your shoulder? Oh, you're a very kind person. Because personally, I would think that it's very awkward actually, and I would find it very uncomfortable actually. So like what the previous speaker Sherman did, I like to do a comparison of a low context culture against a high context culture. So in a low context culture where verbal communication is needed to convey meaning, the outcome would tend to be an embarrassing or an uncomfortable one as portrayed in the video. And in a high context one, like in Japan, verbal communication is not needed because people already understand that it's an acceptable thing to do, and they give the stranger the benefit of the doubt that he's just too tired and he just unintentionally fell asleep on you actually. Another comparison they like to draw is one of a individualism against collectivism. So in an individualistic society, personal interest is placed above the group, and in a collectivism way of society, group interest is placed above the personal interest. So in an individualistic culture like in the Western countries, often the person that is getting leaned on will feel like his personal comfort is being compromised, and you feel like the other person shouldn't be doing this to burden him actually. Whereas in a collectivism way of society, which is typically associated with Asian culture, you normally care for the stranger above your personal comfort, as you understand his plight and you sympathize with him. So now after we have talked about two case studies, I'd like to pass on the time to John, who will talk about how to solve these cultural misunderstandings.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ahmed, and here I continue our group presentation. So, as you can see from the HSBC videos, it seems simple and funny, but in reality, things could be more serious, and cultural misunderstandings may lead to economic loss if the behavior doesn't fit with the customer culture. And then which is very terrible. And then how to solve this problem? There are two parts. The first one is the ability to prepare in advance, and the second part is the ability to adapt instantly when there's something out of preparation. So whenever you have to meet someone from different cultural backgrounds, firstly you have to think that their culture is reasonable to them, and it has its own advantage, as well as diversity makes our world more colorful and less boring. So with the right attitude, you can find their literature, their history, documents, and the people you already knew to learn from their culture, to learn which one is important to your customers, especially and how to show the warmth and respect to people. For example, in order to understand the Japanese culture, you have to know what is samurai, what is bushido, and what is sakura, which so are very important to Japanese. And here is my personal experience. Always give time to use to observe carefully before action. This is my very careful preparation. You simply don't know everything because you are not natural. So try not to be the first one as well as the last one. So as you can see, I think it could be avoided if the English man sees that and observe that there's something left on others' boat. So he shouldn't finish everything. And here, I think that there are still some things unexpected. So you have to react and improvise immediately and effectively. I know it's embarrassing, but let's explain to them. No one blame you because you don't know. So again, if someone else doesn't know the culture, so don't judge them, embrace them. Human being is more precious than any mistakes. And then when the embarrassed moment is over, so let's share the views or perspective to people. We need to understand more each other to avoid future conflicts. Let's talk openly. For example, in the last year, there was a long queue waiting for paying tribute to Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. This action is similar to Western culture, who follow individualism, and they simply don't understand so admiration, so action. So could you explain to them your thinking? And here my friend Clarence will give you the last part of our presentation.
Thank you, John. John has just shared about the recommendations that we can do to improve intercultural relations with one another. Now, I'd like to conclude the presentation by first giving a summary of what we have presented so far. My first speaker, Zhao, started the presentation by defining what intercultural communication is. To reiterate the definition, intercultural communication is a strategic communication between individuals or groups of different linguistic or cultural origins. Next, he touched on the importance of intercultural communication. And the main reason is due to globalization. Our world is becoming more interconnected with growing international relations, be it on a global scale, like economic ties, or on a smaller scale, like interactions with friends like what we have here in NTU. And this brings us to the point that we need to bridge the gap between the cultures to reduce or minimize misunderstandings. And this is actually the main objective of our presentation. Here is to find ways to bridge this gap between the different cultures and to raise awareness that intercultural communication is important and we shouldn't disregard it. My second speaker, Sherman, touched on the first HSBC advertisement of interest, which is the scene in a restaurant. There are distinct cultural differences, as seen in the video, between the Chinese and the English. The Chinese uses less verbal communication, whereas the Westerners use more verbal communication. So the difference between the low and high context cultures that they use has created much misunderstandings between them. My third speaker, Ben, touched on the second HSBC advertisement of interest, which is on a New York subway. An Asian man was leaning on the shoulder of a local. This is actually a cultural practice in Japan, where for people to lean on another commuter's shoulder. However, this is not a cultural practice in the United States. So clearly, there is a cultural difference here. And just like what we have presented in the video for the restaurant, that there is low and high contact cultures differences. This is also evident here. And the individualism versus collectivism culture, it was also addressed. Asian cultures were seen following collectivism, where group values are placed of higher importance than self-interest, whereas for the Westerners, it's the opposite. My fourth speaker, Jiang, has touched on the ways that we can solve intercultural conflict issues, and two main recommendations were addressed, namely prevention and instant adaptation. For prevention, we should have prior knowledge of the culture they're going to interact with and take caution before executing any action. For instant adaptation, we should be more open in terms of both verbal and in terms of thoughts. Because with an open mind, you are able to be more receptive to learn or gain more from other cultures. And with that, we're able to reduce the misunderstandings and conflicts. Now, to conclude the presentation, I'd like to share with you a formula that we're able to get good cultural intelligence. So with good cultural knowledge that you couple with good behavioral skills and with being mindful of any actions that you do in whatever you do in any situations, you are able to obtain good cultural intelligence. And with that, I'd like to end our presentation. I'd like to take questions now.
So does anyone have any questions?